So without further ado, I think for today we talked about funding, etc. But what we heard most is really about this call for greater partnership, greater collaboration. So I'd like to give the floor to Demandra Kanani, who honestly doesn't need any introduction anymore here in Brussels, as the Chief Operating Officer and Chief Spokesperson of Friends of Europe. So over to you.
Thank you. Thank you. That was very kind of you. We're running very, very late. Those of you who do need to take, need to pop to the loo or something, please do so very quickly whilst I bring the speakers up. We are 15 minutes over time, but I'm going to make sure we still take an hour of your time, if I may, because our speakers have duly made time to be here with you, and it wouldn't be fair not to give them the time for this debate that we're having, which is the end, if you like, the concluding. I know there's no time for like that, for you to kind of have a quick break, I'm afraid. So, as I'm saying, this is our concluding session of this joint Africa-Europe Foundation and Friends of Europe discussion. And what we want to do now is talk about money, but talk about money in a different way. In that, how do we... Sorry, I'm going to wait for you to still... Shh. Hush. Thank you. Sorry. We're going to talk about money, but money in a different way, in the sense that how do we move from an aid mindset to an investment mindset? International Development Corporation was born and hatched at a time where the world was very different. You all know that. Those of you who've been steeped in it, either as those who are receiving money or those who are involved in giving money, you know that it was born at a time when the world was very, very different. We didn't have what we have now in the early part of the 21st century. We have a much more developed, intellectually, socially progressed set of countries and continents around the world which have voice, have visibility, and have strength. And we need to acknowledge that in terms of how we behave. And one of the things that Friends of Europe and shared with Africa-Europe Foundation is that it's about time that we shifted the paradigm around aid into one of mutuality, reciprocity, and interdependence. That's the world we live in now. But how does the movement and the policy of development cooperation, development aid, catch up? How do we make sure it happens? Because it's sorely needed. And if we go by what happened recently at the future of multilateralism in New York, it was very clear from people in Africa, Asia, elsewhere, they're pretty miffed with what's happening in terms of the power structures, the dialogue, the way things are structured, the kind of voice that's being created. And all we have to, people feel patronized, done to, and included in the margins. And we need to change that. And I think that given what's happened this morning, we won't dwell on that. It's like, it's already this dark cover of gloom that's enveloped us. We're trying to be positive if we can and see if, what Europe's going to have to do to be more pragmatic, more in tune with what it's capable of doing, and be grown up about its confidence and its self-determination, rather than relying on partners that are not going to be so reliable in the future. So on that note, can I invite our speakers, please, to take your seats? Please, please, please. Not only have we got reduced time, but we've got a panel which is quite excessive. And what I mean by that is we never have this many people on a panel. But, it was a necessity, because we wanted to make sure that we had perspectives from both sides of this equation of aid and investment, but also to get the perspectives of someone who's actually from the Commission, who's involved in, I'm sure, advising what Ursula von der Leyen is going to be doing next on development cooperation. That's Luc Bagot. We want to get perspectives from across the piece here, from people who have been involved in both funding, financing, and are also advocates, and those who are being able to talk truth to power in different ways. But I'm going to start with, we've got two development agencies, which I want to begin with. And if I can say this, with all due respect, enlightened development agencies, which I'm not saying the others aren't. I'm not saying that, but they get this. And so this agenda. So I'm going to start with Reinhold. Reinhold, can you say a little bit about the importance of moving from an aid to an investment approach. What's your perspective on that?
Thank you very much, Dharmendra, for the question. First of all, I want to thank the Africa Euro Foundation for hosting this event, for inviting me. We've, as GIZ, worked closely with the foundation over the past couple of years. It's the first time that I get to participate in one of your flagship events. I have to say I'm truly impressed, and thank you very much, and congratulations for putting this together. Now, I don't know if you all know GIZ. GIZ is the German International Cooperation Agency. We're an implementing agency, so we're not in charge of policy, we're not in charge of money. So in that sense, maybe a couple of the themes that you want to put on this panel are not really for me to speak about. And maybe therefore also a short reflection in the very beginning as to what is it about this aid mindset and an investment mindset. Because I have to say, as a representative of GIZ in that German ecosystem, I very much struggle with that notion of aid mindset. I've been working for GIZ for a long time, 17 years, I believe, feels a bit longer sometimes. A long, long time. I've never felt like I was in a, let's say, aid relationship or donor-recipient relationship or one-sided relationship. Quite the contrary. What got me into the job was an interest to work together with other countries, other peoples on problems that I thought were unacceptable for the human predicament. And the way we implement in GIZ and also as Germany, our international cooperation is very much centered around the notion of partner orientation and collaboration. In fact, everything we do is based on, most of what we do, on behalf of the German government, various ministries, the main ministry being the Ministry for Economic Cooperation and Development. It's based on bilateral agreements where, the priorities of cooperation, the mutual interests of cooperation are politically agreed. And we come in then with the implementation of projects serving those needs. We are having political champions, owners of collaboration projects that we implement, who are entitled to receive the services of these projects and steer us politically. We cannot, by default, work against the interests of our partners because our core business is capacity development. Have you ever tried to build the capacity of somebody who doesn't want to have their capacity built up? It's probably impossible. So for me personally, and coming from that side of the ecosystem, I do know the international cooperation landscape is bigger. We've talked about that a lot over the past years. But I mention that because I would like to invite us all to differentiate a little bit when we have this debate and see, okay, what areas of the international cooperation landscape do we struggle with? Where do we want to make changes and what do we like? Why is that important? It is important in my mind because international cooperation is under threat. We have seen it in the European elections, both on the national level as well as the elections for the European Parliament. We have concerns about economic well-being and competitiveness and such topics in Europe. All of these things are not conducive for more investment in international cooperation. I believe we do need more investment in international cooperation. But if we speak to the notion that international cooperation maybe itself is a problem or is not living up to the standards or has to change majorly, maybe we're doing a disservice to international cooperation. So maybe let's differentiate a little bit in the debate, and then we can also find solutions to the problems that we see and that are clearly there. Mm-hmm. I come to the issue of investment, and it's connected to the issue of what status does the field of international cooperation have, because that means how much money, public money, will be invested in international cooperation. Mm-hmm. We see that is under threat. The budget are going down, so we need to find new partnerships, new alliances in order to work on the issues that we see that are binding us together. The SDGs, as you know, are development goals not for developing countries, whatever that is. I struggle with the term, but for all of us, because we're all developing towards something, and we also have to organize our international economic system in a way that fosters a global development towards achieving the SDGs. Our, I believe now, go-to solution for finding the means to be more effective in international cooperation is seeking partnerships with the private sector, There we come towards an investment mindset as well. We believe that public money alone will not be enough. We need also private engagement in international cooperation, maybe also in places we have not seen it before. So that there we have to move indeed towards an investment mindset, and we have to work with our partners to build the ecosystems that are more attractive to private investment than maybe they have been before. Part of that, and I know that you will also, Jean will talk about that, but part of that is also, if you want to build new alliances, we have to maybe change our language a little bit.
Okay.
And maybe Jean has something to add to this.
He will do.
To this as well.
Thank you very much, Rana. See, I mean, let's. I'm glad you're saying what you're saying. You're obviously enlightened in the sense that you don't make a distinction in terms of looking at aid as nothing other than an investment and not seeing it that. But I think it'd be interesting to see how people react to that, because it's not simply, it's in the eye of the beholder often. It's in the eye of the beholder. And whilst your mindset is clear, how people receive it might be different. And I think we need to allow space for that conversation. So thank you for that. But, you know, I want to move on to Jean. We had I'm not sure if any of you watched this interview, an interview with Jean Van Vetter and the chairman of GIZ. Now, GIZ is obviously one of the largest development agencies in the world. You know, it's there. But Germany, like many other countries, have felt the pinch of debt. And, you know, basically everyone's turning inwards. And we've seen the highest level of cuts to development aid across Europe in a generation. Colleagues, that's just facts. You look at what's happened in the Netherlands, which has been a huge supporter of development aid, cutting and slashing by hundreds of millions. We've seen that in the UK, we're seeing that in France, Germany, and elsewhere. Italy, in fact. Everyone's moving into spending on defense and economic livelihoods. And actually, development aid is seen as the easiest cut. As we know historically, those of you who are old as me will know that when there is a budget cut, development funding and voluntary sector are the easiest targets for cutting. So on that note, I want to move to Jean Van Vetter, who we had the conversation about the fact that people outside this room don't understand development aid and development cooperation. They don't give a jot, really. And why? Why would they? If you're struggling between fuel and food, etc., and we know there's hundreds of millions going to Africa or parts of Asia, you think, why? So is there a need to change the narrative about development cooperation and to call it something else, or to explain it better, so ordinary Jane and Jamila understand on the street that actually it's important to them as much as it is to anybody else?
Thank you, Dan and Ryan. Thank you very much for organizing this and to see so many people in the room. Reynolds said we need to change the language, and you say we need to change the narrative, so I will speak in French. No, I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding, but I think we need to get out of our bubble. I think the development cooperation sector over the years became an industry, which is called, and became a kind of a sector. And I always say that development cooperation is not a sector. We are a vector to change something. And so we need to communicate differently. We need to get out of our bubble, meet and speak the language of other stakeholders, including the private sector, and Mukhtar will certainly speak about that. Yesterday, I was invited to the Belgian Parliament, to the Foreign Affairs Commission. As you know, in Belgium, we are also discussing about budget cuts, but the good news is that there is still no government, so we still have a chance to save the sauver les meubles, as we say in French. And so we are trying to do that, and it's a good exercise for us, because we need to engage, convince policymakers, and find the right arguments. And yesterday, I have to say, I was very pleased, because we had 7 different political parties in front of us, including some who have been very critical on development cooperation. And I could perceive yesterday a change of language from them, and much more interest. And why? And I will give you an anecdote. The president of the Liberal Party, people of Belgium know him very well, Georges-Louis Boucher, in a tweet a few weeks ago said, what is the use of development cooperation? It doesn't serve anybody. Can you name one country that received development aid that said, thank you, I have it, and I'm now developed? And he felt that nobody could come with an answer. But then on the tweet feed, many people who know came with an example which is very well known. It's South Korea. South Korea was one of the largest recipients of ODA 50 years ago. You know what now? The budget of development cooperation of South Korea is 4 times the budget of development cooperation of Belgium. So it's a large player, and his book is going to be one of the major players in development cooperation in Africa in the coming years. So a country that received ODA 50 years ago is now a successful example of an ODA giver. And I can give you another example right here in the room. Belgium. Belgium was also, after the World War I and World War II, a recipient of development cooperation. And that's what we need to do. Say development cooperation is not about Africa, it's not about Asia, it's not about South America, it's not about the global South. It's about us, and it's about a solidarity between countries to solve our common issues. And when you speak about that, say this is our common issues, it's not about helping charity, but it's basically solving our common issues together, then the issue of budget becomes less an issue, because, and there, in the mindset of politicians, the idea that it is indeed an investment become much more obvious. And this is what I felt yesterday in the Belgian parliament, and it gives me hope that we can succeed in that. And for that, we need alliance. And I'm very happy to be with colleagues that I know personally. For most of them, we need to stop also walking alone. And I want to congratulate the EU for that, because they launched this Team Europe initiative, say stop Europe, Belgium, Germany, France, walking independently and thinking that you can resolve everything alone. No, get together in alliance. And GIZ and AFD and us, we work a lot together. Gates as well. Recently we signed a MOU. And I think that's also part of the solution, is synergies, economies of scales. And then you get to speak about the language and the narrative much more stronger, because you come with a common voice. We are not competing. We are really like advocating for something global. And I invite other partners in the room, because here we are European, in a way, partners, and American one, sorry. But we need more African, Asian, South American partners that come in this coalition to fight for what we believe is an investment for the future. And I will stop it, because I know you will stop me.
Thank you very much. Because I want to move to the third. I mean, because I want to take the full sweep of development agencies' experiences. So, you know, AFD, obviously, Agence Française, okay, you've sustained the shock of much of the cuts that have been proposed. There might be more, obviously, depending on the politics and the shift to the right that we're seeing in France. When we have, I mean, you're leading the work at the AFD on partnerships and communication. When a dominant narrative of economic security and the disposability of development aid, because it's neither here or there for most people, especially politicians, how do you try and ensure reciprocity, mutuality, and independence at the core of partnerships? How do you do that? And are you doing that?
Thank you so much. And then I would thank Friends of Europe and all the organizers for inviting AFD to this gathering, and very pleased to have good friends on the panel with me. And as you said, I'm leading the mobilization and partnership works at the foundation. I wanted to say, I used to work with Anya at the Gates Foundation 10 years ago, and we're doing partnerships together today, and I'm going to come back to that later on. But I want to say two points. The first one is, we at the AFD has moved from an aid narrative to an investment narrative, which is sustainable investment. Whatever we do on the ground in Africa, in Asia, in the fields of operation we work, we make sure that the resources we put on the table makes impact and have the results that is expected both from us and both from the recipient countries. When I say recipient countries, it can be, most of it are delivered as loans, that is concessional, and sometimes you have some grant components on it. And what is interesting is we're also shifting, I know Luc will come back to that, the new narrative from development cooperation to global gateway, which is a window of opportunity of trying to make impact and co-investing in the futures of the people we work with in Africa, in Asia, in Latin America. Coming back to your question, and then giving a clear example is work we've done, or we're doing currently with the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, working together on health issues in Pakistan and in other spheres, in gender, access to vaccines, and to come agriculture, other sectors. Anya will come back later on that, with a grant resource from the Gates Foundation of 20, 30, 40 million dollars, we'll be able to do 100, 200 million dollars or euros investment in Pakistan, in sub-Saharan Africa. And doing that, you have to have a narrative for convincing people already internally within the bank, the institution, the agency, the people that vote for that budget. Jan talked about the budget constraint. We have a government in France. We're undergoing a budget cut as well of more than 30%. That it will impact the resources we're going to spend. But we have to be creative, working with the private sector. Mukhtar will come back to that. Having those resources in terms of guarantees, in terms of leverage with foundation to be able to have more impact, and continue investing in not only infrastructure, but social sectors, education, healthcare, to meet the needs of the people we're serving. Come from a developing country, Senegal, what Jan was talking about is very clear to me. It's easier to have a cooperation with different entities together in a common framework like the JEFIC or Team Europe initiative, rather than dealing with Germany here, France here, Gates, Italy, etc., etc. So it will reinforce the donors, the recipient countries' framework, the tools, the way they receive the resources, the way they disperse it, and the way they report back in terms of accountability and deliverability. So what is important is for us to increasingly work together as joint partners, not only at EU level, but together with the private sector, the foundation, to be able to meet the needs of the donor, the recipient countries in the countries who operate. And I will finish by the example Jan mentioned about South Korea. I think one way of thinking about the way it works as well, how those investments went to South Korea or other countries, for US money to Israel, etc. The way it is dispersed to sub-Saharan Africa and some developing countries today is totally different. It's disparate, and sometimes it's come into smaller amounts. So if it came into a big chunk, like I think US is doing some good stuff, actually. I'm doing some publicity for US, like MCC. When they come, they work together on a bunch of compact in energy, transport, key sector, putting in $500 billion investment in I would say aid, but it's investment as well, because it brings in private sector. It has much more impact than putting 30 million here, 10 million here, 50 million euro.
Exactly.
And then after, you have to do a lot of communication about that to see the impact. So we should think about that. I think Global Gateway is a little bit part of that. Luc will come back to that.
Indeed. I think that's why the South Korea model, it's great. It's a great example, and I understand why you raised it, Jean, about the narrative of it's not about North and South. It's not about, it's a very different thing. But it feels distant.
Yeah.
It feels much more coherent because it's a place. And as you say, a lot of dosh went in at one time. And USA do the good thing.
Exactly.
They've been, they have the power and the punch and are very coordinated.
Exactly.
And so they're able to do that. But when you've got this myriad grouping, it's very different. I wonder how people, and if there's, I will come to you, I promise you, how do you feel about this? So you may not be in Africa or Indonesia or Latin America, but I wonder how the countries are experiencing what you're describing. Because it sounds like you guys are getting your act together, right? Which is great.
Yeah.
But how does it feel at the other end is what I think we need to think about also, which is not to be critical of you at all, but I just think we need to, it has to be symbiotic, this thing. Otherwise we just go backwards. Luke, if I can turn to you. Obviously, you're not going to tell us all the little secrets on the back of a note you've made for your colleagues further up the chain. But I mean by that, Ursula von der Leyen's cabinet and others. Where is this narrative going on development cooperation, do you think? People are genuinely concerned. We've got the new commissioner designate right now being grilled, if you like, for his job. And he has made some comments which would suggest a me-first approach, if I could describe it gently in that way. Is that the direction of travel? Explain to us what you see as let's say, the kind of narrative you think is going to emerge on this agenda in the next mandate, in this mandate coming.
Okay, thank you. So thank you, Dharmendra, for the invite first, and it's a pleasure to be here with members of this panel, distinguished member, I must say, and this is a very timely event ahead of the, I think, 7th African Union, European Union Summit in February next year. And we have just released a report, a joint progress report on the implementation of the Global Gateway Africa-Europe investment package. It is publicly available, and it has been presented by our Commissioner Pelainen in Addis Ababa last October. So I understand that you would like, that you want me to disclose some secrets, and but before looking forward, let me looking backward, not so far away in time. Even if I've spent 30 years in this business, I will go back to 5 years ago, when at the beginning of this mandate, of the mandate of this current commission in 2019, the commission set out to shift from a donor-recipient model. Sorry, we were maybe less advanced than Germany, towards, let's say, equal partnership. And we have changed the name, for instance, of our DG, Directorate General, from development cooperation to international partnership. But beyond this formal change, I think that there was the recognition that our partner countries want more than aid, and that the challenges we face are shared, and that we have common interests at stake. And this shift is, in fact, the cornerstone of the Global Gateway strategy that has been already mentioned. And this is a strategy for investment. We want to mobilize 300 billion before 27. And from there, we have revamped our cooperation model in line with the new global realities, including the COVID, the war, the geopolitical competition, the democratic backsliding, climate change crisis. So a world of polycrisis, let's say. And but the overarching objective has not changed and will not change in the future. I mean that we will continue to apply the objective of the EU treaties. This is to foster the sustainable economic, social, and environmental development of developing countries with the primary aim of eradicating poverty. And the Agenda 2030 and the Sustainable Development Goals remain our compass, clearly. What we can say for the future now? We are now, of course, moving to a new political cycle with the college, expected to take office on the 1st of December, if everything goes well in the parliament. So we need to look at the future. First, the political guidelines of the president of the commission and the mission letter of the commissioner designate for international partnerships are very clear. So we need to take Global Gateway from startup to scale up. And for this, we need to be more strategic. And for me, I see 3 avenues for that. But I hope that my boss will confirm that, my new boss will confirm that in the coming weeks. So first, to increase private finance mobilization in a context of scarce official development aid. First avenue. Difficult, and we have to find the right tools for that. Second, to build member state teams to pool as much as possible the strengths and resources at member state level to develop projects that can be scale up at European level. And third, to develop a 360 approach. So this is a jargon maybe, but a 360 approach for supporting investment as hard investment in infrastructure, in growth, and human development must go hand in hand to have sustainable results and impact. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm sure there'll be lots of questions about what you're doing. Let's hope that your commissioner, that's obviously being grilled at the moment, and I hope appropriately so, will come up with the right answers and the right approach, and that what you set out is followed in the weeks and months to come. But given what's happened in the past 48 hours, we don't know what the world's going to do in the next couple of months. Annie, I want to come to you. You set up kind of apart slightly from this development agency and the government. Gates Foundation, you've been well known over the years to focus on health, education, agriculture, etc. You've kind of done both big stuff and small stuff, and you're well known. From your experience, Anya, how do you balance? Because it's important to balance the big infrastructure stuff with locality. Locality matters. So human capital development is as essential as the infrastructure stuff, but mostly funders get that wrong sometimes, and they don't work with the grain of locality sometimes, and you get an infrastructure project that has no meaning to a local community. How do you balance the two?
Thank you. Thank you for the questions. Thank you for being here. So I think to an extent, the framing is also not new. That I think when we have more a center-right shift in governments, very often I think development ministries rename themselves, and you find trade and different terms into what was different before. So I do think that these are challenging times, and we are certainly concerned about 9 billion cuts across the European donors, and that's especially for Africa, 25%, which used to be 40% of development aid. So we are certainly concerned by those numbers. And to your point, I do think it is important to recall that investments in human capital are just as important as investments in infrastructure. And when donors have to prioritize, which they of course do have, because I think it is needless to say that the challenges at the moment are very numerous, and they are not becoming less by the hour. But then it would be good if donors could be very strategic about thinking about high impact instruments that will continue to need to be funded by grant type funding. And those are typically health, education, nutrition, gender, all of the things that you mentioned. And if we look at high impact, things like Gavi, the Global Alliance for Vaccination Immunization, has immunized 1.1 billion children in 78 low-income countries. I mean, nutrition is one of those where we look at malnutrition and stunting causes 3 trillion of productivity loss annually, which are high-impact instruments. I mean, if we look at investments in family planning and MNCH, this is $1 invested, you get back almost $9 in terms of return to families and economies. So I think, yes, it is human capital investments, but those are investments that are both enhanced and are also really important to accompany the infrastructure, sort of hard investments. One other thing I want to just state, I think we are not clear enough about distinguishing the funding streams. Not all investment needs are made equal. Some will continue to need grant funding or eventually being potentially absorbed by domestic budgets. And some can be funded by concessional loans or even loans that, as Papa was describing, can be leveraged by grant elements. But this needs to be distinguished. A climate mitigation investment in a middle-income country is very different from a health investment in a least income country. And I think sometimes we're jumping too quickly to conclusions and saying all of those needs are the same, instead of distinguishing clearly. If you look at climate needs, vastly, as we heard this morning by Arantxa in the panel, huge needs in climate adaptation. And that is a very different fundable instrument than climate mitigation projects, for which there will be eventually a market. And so I think that needs to be distinguished.
What's the danger of that? Because the way we are at the Friends of Europe and others, I hope, you can be a grant funder and have an investment mindset.
Of course.
That's the point I'm making.
And that's what I'm saying about impact instruments.
Right.
I think if you need to prioritize, it doesn't mean that because it's a grant, you're not measuring your impact.
Yeah.
And I think that is absolutely something that, as you know, the foundation is obsessed with data. So certainly, I don't think what I'm saying is that what can be or needs to be grant funded can A, still be measured, and B, has a measurable impact on the rest of the development, on increasing wealth and resilience in the economies. And I think that's important. And if we think about what we actually mean by those mutually beneficial partnerships, then be much clearer about what the actual benefits on both sides are, whether they're trade, energy, green climate investments on the one hand side, investments in human capital on the other side, skills, jobs, economic growth. I think we need to be very good in articulating those on both sides and then also measure them and track them and monitor them, because then you do actually build those partnerships that we all want.
And Annie, if I may just press upon you one last thing. One thing that's very poor that we do, I mean, having come from a funding background myself as well, but we had the luxury to fund learning and evaluation because we were a lottery. We had lots of money, so we could do that. But I know a lot of independent funders and governments and funders find it difficult to be able to find that extra penny to do that. As an independent funder, have you been able to scoop up stuff and then play it back to other people about what works, what doesn't work, and the kind of learning you've had both for infrastructure, but also people and human capital development?
I mean, yes, the answer is quickly that we measure all the time. Whereas, as I said, we're really obsessed by all the grants we're giving, also in terms of tracking and setting milestones. Are we good enough to share? Probably not. And could it be improved? For sure, because I think we can always improve that. That's for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. Because I think one of the things is that the only way you stop the loop of making the same mistakes or people duplicating efforts is if you kind of pull the learning in different ways. Easier said than done, I do know that.
Especially if you are subject to a political cycle, you may have to not have the luxury to be quite as impact-driven sometimes.
Sure. Okay, thank you very much. Last but not least, Mukhtar. You've been involved in the sustainable development field and working with private sector partners for a very long time. Right, and there's this kind of holy grail of we need the private sector, but people say they need the right conditions, they need stability, they need predictability to invest, etc., and so forth. Tell us from your experience, how do we get more private sector investment and involvement, and what are the best routes in to do that, from your experience?
Fantastic. Thank you very much, first of all, for having me here. So the Brussels Africa hub, so the word Brussels doesn't mean the capital of Belgium, it means actually the European Union. Whenever we talk about Brussels, we mean Europe as a whole and Africa as a continent, and hub means we are anchored here in Brussels. So I come from the banking industry, that's my background, and actually the founding members of the Brussels Africa hub are all from the banking industry, except one, which is Annie Mutamba. She's somewhere here as well. She's guiding us through the different European institutions. That's her expertise. Now, we are talking about aid here, from moving to aid to our investment. When you talk about aid, actually we are talking about taxpayers' money. And taxpayers' money is something very touchy, because I belong to those people who strongly believe taxpayers' money need to be allocated efficiently. Very fundamental. So that's why, giving the example of South Korea as an example has already been given, but I think in my own, let's say, understanding, one of the most successful, let's say, development aid, if you can call it like that, is the Marshall Plan after the Second World War,
Indeed.
Which took place here in Europe. And actually the Marshall Plan was an investment, a huge investment in the sense of it created a market for the US private sector. Even today, I think a few months ago, the president of ECB, Christine Lagarde, she kind of came up with a figure which is kind of astonishing. So, many, many years after the Second World War, the benefits of that investment of the Marshall Plan is still visible. Why? We who are active in the banking and the finance industry, we are allocating on a yearly basis at least 400 billion euros to the US market. So we are one of the European market is one of the biggest investors still today, and US stocks and US debt and even a US private equity, etc. So that was a really nice investment. So now when I hear, that word development aid, when I hear, the hearing is now taking place at the European Parliament, just like you mentioned, for me, this need to lead to how can the European taxpayers' money, which I'm one of those people who pay taxes here, and I belong to a specific group as well who pay taxes twice, meaning I pay taxes here in Europe, and every single month we also send X percentage of our already taxed revenue, income back to Africa. So we are paying taxes over there as well. So that's why for us it's really touchy thing when we talk about taxpayers' money, because we are heavily impacted. So that's why we rather prefer to talk about investment. So why? Because investment, we will generate return, and return allow us to reinvest again. So the mechanism that should take place, and our point of view from the Brussels Africa Hub, yes, of course, is to make sure that can we leverage the existing tools that already been put in place. And again, don't misunderstand me, here in Europe, the European Union, they put in place the right frameworks which would allow European private investors and institutional investors to leverage those vehicles to invest in the African continent or other places around the world, which we are already doing so, because for the listed market, we are using what is known UCIT. I know for some of you, it's really, I don't use the word Chinese, but anyway, I like to use it anyway. So it's a Chinese language. And since this year, the beginning of this year, to be more precise, since January 4, a new vehicle has been brought alive by the European Commission. It's called the LTIF 2.0. Is the European Long-Term Investment Fund, which allow actually retail investors and institutional investors to co-invest together in projects in places like Africa. Why? Because Africa is, we don't have a stock exchange, so we have a huge potential private market, and those vehicles would allow to access those markets. But on the conditionality, again, that we do have the few taxpayers' money that's currently, if I understand well, because I heard budgets getting left and right, that's still available, are efficiently allocated to help those who are based here in Europe to find their way on the African continent, just like the Marshall Plan did for the American market. And the benefits is definitely still today visible.
This is refreshing, but for example, the chap next to you, Luke, how often do you talk to him about this kind of stuff? Because he's got the private sector coming into the area. We know that the two reports, Letta and Draghi, perhaps they missed the point on development, and also they missed the point on how Africa and Asia have the opportunity to create a wing path for economic growth and development for Europe also. Absolutely, when you think about the opportunities that Africa represents for itself, but also as a neighbor in terms of anything to do with renewable energy, green energy, agriculture, everything you can think of. There's an opportunity for mutuality of investment from the private sector, banking sector, but also partnered with public money. Are people getting it?
That's the thing, it's quite interesting, because if you look at today, let's say the critical sectors, when we talk about, let's say, the automotive industry, which is one of the backbone of the European economy, or we look to the semiconductors business value chain. So all this stuff, actually, you cannot, let me put it like this, green transition or Green Deal without the African continent is kind of a pipe dream, if I can put it in that sentence. So
that's bold. Yeah, great.
And the investment potential it tells you everything, actually. When you are aware of the necessity of transforming the global economy, which everyone hope it will be the case, then investment opportunity is huge. Now the question is how to unlock it. And I think all the tools are here. Yeah. You just need to sit around the table and have a grown-up conversation.
Indeed, but there is, let's think about it. There are so many opportunities for people to get around the table. You've got the COP thing coming. You've got the union meeting again next year. We seem to have interminable meetings, yet we don't get to the heart of actual action. And there's something about, and it's mostly men, who are thinking that mañana, and we'll move on and play politics. But we don't have the time. But I want to bring you all in because I know that you've listened to everyone, but I know that Jean Van Vetter and Luc wants to come in quite quickly on what I've perhaps provoked. But whoever wants to go first.
Okay, very, sorry.
But hold your mic, yeah.
Yes, very quickly from my side. So I can only but agree with you. But that first, the needs for engagement are stronger than ever. And in a complex and fragmented world where the EU economic autonomy, security, and values are increasingly challenged. And you mentioned green transition. We need green hydrogen for our green transition. We need critical raw materials processed in third country for our green transition. So we can find beneficial partnership. Industrialization in Namibia, Namibia producing green hydrogen to be exported to Europe will be beneficial for both regions, Namibia and the European Union. This is the first point. The second point is that we are not in track to reach the 2030 agenda. We know that from the last report released by the UN that only 70% of the SDGs the 70% of the target even, the target under the SDGs are met or will be met. And the annual gap to reach the SDGs is huge. I think that it's around 4 trillion annually to reach the SDGs in least developed and middle-income countries. So because of the scale of the challenge and the context of scarce official development aid, private finance mobilization is absolutely essential. So we have, and we try to, in fact, to design the tools to mobilize this. And this is the case, for instance, for the European Fund for Sustainable Development, plus that where we have a scheme to guarantee investment from the private sector in third countries. Thank you.
Yeah, I suppose there's the question about how do you mobilize both them, but also the banking and the venture capitalists all at the same time in the same space. But I haven't got time for an answer to that. Jean, very quickly.
Quickly, I just want to support Mukhtar, but to tell about the difficulty. I know Mukhtar for for 2 years, I think, and I've been trying to help him because he has a brilliant idea, and I think he should be supported. But just to tell you, the number of barriers he's facing is very modest, but I know that it's not easy to meet with the EU, it's not easy to meet with Belgium, it's not easy to meet a politician interested in his idea. So we need to, when I said get out of our bubble, I really mean it. We need to change our system. I look at the Belgian one, which I know very well, and even my system enable. Mukhtar asked me just for a small investment in what he's doing. I'm trying to get that. It's difficult. Why private sector? Why do you use public money to fund the private sector? Why this initiative and not another one? So you have a lot of what I call in Dutch we say yama, yes, but not the why not. And that's an issue in our sector. I can say it humbly. I have too much yes, but, and that's the problem. And Mukhtar, I'm sure you agree, but it's difficult to get your idea out of and you met the former Prime Minister of Belgium, and you try to meet the new government. They say, yes, nice idea, but it doesn't really materialize. And that's why I'm here today, is because I'm pleading that we need to change our system, our mindset, and the instruments that go around those. It's key, and it's the time to do it right now.
Let's hope you and the others, leaders of development agencies, are able to spur that momentum. But thank you very much. Elisa, please, if I can pick on you. You're with the Ecobank Foundation. So you work, I think it's a nice segue from what Mukhtar was saying, but in terms of the private sector, you work with them. What's your reflection on what Mukhtar said? Do you agree? Do you have an alternative? What are your kind of views on it?
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for having me.
Do introduce yourself, sorry.
Yes, sorry. So I'm Elisa Desbordes. I'm the CEO of the Ecobank Foundation. So for the ones of you who might not know about the Ecobank Foundation and specifically about Ecobank, Ecobank is the largest Pan-African bank. So we are present in 39 countries. And so the foundation is the body of the bank to do social impact, and we have a mandate across the sub-Saharan the African country, I apologize, of EcoBank, so 35 countries. So there's a lot of things I would like to share. I will be brief because I will have to leave soon, unfortunately. But I think just coming back on what was just said. So first of all, from a purely private investment perspective, so like the banking, and I'm going to have this banking hat very shortly, which is not the one that I know the most, but there is indeed, from an investment perspective, there's a lot of appetite by the African private sector to have a larger role. But I think there's also a question of framework, as it was rightly said by the panelists, and there's also a question of maybe sometimes as well being able to work better with some of the partners as well. So I know that there's a lot of work that is happening and a lot of discussions, but I think there's also this need as well, maybe on being more, have this seat on the table, because we do speak a lot about private sector, but I don't think we have that much the opportunity for the African private sector to be also part of the discussion, like in the room as well. Now, I would like to kind of open up a bit as well the conversation and bringing in the kind of philanthropy aspect to it, so like the private philanthropy as well, if you don't mind. And I will here, I mean, as we've been talking a lot about a renewed partnership or a new deal or rethinking global, I mean, I don't know how we want to call that, but something that I think would be quite critical as well would be to also discuss and collaborate to develop on the continent, so in Africa as well, framework for a private sector to be able to be more, to have more appetite, maybe to also invest in social impact activities. Because right now, so you will have some, like in Europe or in the US, so you do have a lot of frameworks like to kind of encourage companies as well to donate, so to have some of their profit invested into social impact. That's something that doesn't exist much on the continent.
Sure.
And I think it would be quite important to look at how we could also address this issue to just also allow the private philanthropy to develop more. And specifically, as we're looking at having a more long-term and transformative impact, so that we also have this kind of investment coming from the continent and those resources being mobilized as well on the continent. And the last thing I would like to add is that. And I think it was also mentioned by some of the panelists now and also like previously, is that when we're also looking at moving towards an investment mindset, and as we're thinking about or rethinking about this partnership, what is for me very much critical as well is to ensure that we talk and listen to the partners on the continent, so and understand that their priorities might not be our priorities, and be fine with that. So there might be sometimes some heated conversation from time to time to find the right compromise, but I think it's very important to understand that their priorities might be different, and that the impact might also appear or might also need to be measured in a different way as well. Because sometimes, obviously impact is very important and everyone wants to be able to measure their impact. But sometimes the impact framework that we use, we miss some of the elements by using it, because there's, as we say, like some of the elements will be lost into translation, if I may put it this way.
Sure.
So let me stop here for now. Thank you very much.
No, Lisa, thank you for being here. But I'm interested to know, who do you have this conversation with in terms of the development agencies or the European Commission?
So at my level, the European Commission at this point, that's the first time we're having this conversation. Then in terms of development...
You see why I'm asking this question, right?
No, definitely.
Okay.
In terms of development agencies, we do speak with IFD, and I think that's mostly the one that we've, at least for the ones on the panel, that the one that we have been speaking with so far. Thank you.
Because there are forums. I mean, as I said, these gentlemen and others are in groups. And it's about how do you kind of get those groups to kind of come together with people like you and others. And it's like what Jean's comment about we need to kind of break the bubble, which is both physical but also mental. So thank you very much for your comment. Colleagues, I have 1, 2, and 3 right at the back. Excellent. So first of all, good to see you. Please introduce yourself.
Camilla Bruckner, representative of the UN and director of the UNDP office here. So, I'm smiling to Luc, and to Reinhold, and to Jean, because my question is directed to you, and a little bit in extension of what you just said. So first of all, I should say from the UN side that we very much welcome the Global Gateway Initiative in light of what Luc also highlighted, the need for, or the financing gap that we're facing at the moment, and we need more of these initiatives that really mobilize this kind of financing. We also welcome the 360 approach that should not only be rhetoric, I hope, because investment alone is not enough to build a holistic approach and ensure exactly to hit and benefit some of those who are left behind, because otherwise this project will not succeed, and the UN very much would like to see this succeed, because it also should help build back the trust between the EU and many of the partner countries that in Africa that should be strengthened, not least in light of today's result, etc. I don't need to elaborate on that.
But your question?
Yeah. So the question is.
Sorry.
Yes. No. You're absolutely right. The question is, what mechanisms do you have in place to ensure that it's not only the European companies that benefit from this effort? We heard early on somebody referring to the Oxfam report that I think, Luc, you actually participated in the launch with, that says that so far, most of the benefits seem to be coming back to the big European companies that are participating in the Global Gateway. So what mechanisms do you have in place? And to what extent are you using the mechanisms that are already present in countries, including some of the jointly invested mechanisms, such as the INFFs, the Integrated National Financing Frameworks, which are a platform to identify with governments what their investment needs are, and other plans or development plans that the countries have in place to exactly get cornered on the priorities that they have. So I would like to
the locality thing and the actually instruments you're using to engage the private sector. Thank you so much. Gentlemen, you had your hand up. Please do introduce yourself.
I'm a former EU ambassador to a couple of African countries, and I'd like to provoke my former colleagues, and notably Luc Bagu. We have been speaking about private sector leverage for at least the last 10 years. And we haven't, and much longer, probably. And we haven't so much to show for it. Because indeed, as Jean said, it's extremely complicated to bring all these people together. And we have been speaking a lot of blending, PPPs, and de-risking. But are we speaking about de-risking, or are we only speaking about shifting risks from the private sector to the donor community or the new partners, whatever you call them? And I'm taking a starting point, maybe the EcoBank CEO may confirm, in a lot of African countries, the banking sector is very liquid. So the problem is not necessarily a lack of capital, but the lack of investment opportunities in those countries for these liquid banks. And these lack of investment opportunities may be linked to the problem of governance, not conducive investment climate. And when Luc speaks about the 360% approach, the GRI approach, of course, he includes indeed these conditionalities which makes investing in Africa more attractive. Because basically, it's to improve governance that you really decrease risk rather than shifting risk. Now, my question is to all our partners in the panel, what do we do about governance issues in these new debates? We heard Malik Sall this morning say we should abandon political conditionalities, but shouldn't we reintroduce, on the contrary, a couple of investment climate-related conditionalities? And where those countries are not willing to create these improved environment, shouldn't we dare to be more selective in our ODA allocations, at least in those areas? Because as was said also earlier on, maybe we should distinguish and differentiate different types of ODA, but accept that these type of investment, let's say, commercially viable investments can only be sold in countries where you have reform-minded governments.
Okay, that's a difficult one. I mean, the governance one I get, and it's interesting that you don't talk about governance in the EU or the IMF. So when you speak to countries receiving money from the IMF, you are, as a country, under a strong stranglehold to change your economic model according to a model that doesn't fit parts of Africa. And I think that, so I suppose my response to that is that I think governance needs to be looked at across the piece. And sometimes the IMF and the others really need to look at hard in the mirror about the strings they attach or the models they attach to countries that they fund, and having to enable them to reshape themselves, which is not ingrained with how they see their future. But I will ask people to respond to that. But thank you, sir. Lady, right at the back. Just right at the back there. And again, do introduce yourself.
Thank you. My name is Alina Orrico. I am with the European Development Finance Institutions. I'm actually Team Europe and Global Gateway Advisor. I would like to respond to that just along the lines of what you mentioned. Market creation is essential. I mean, what's the point of mobilizing capital, private capital, if you don't have projects or sufficiently projects to absorb them? DFIs would use their local offices to source projects on the ground, and I truly believe that the Team Europe coordination, which is an area where the DFIs are really focusing on when implementing Global Gateway, and it's been a coordination. It takes time, resources, and it's an investment per se. Project origination, if we exchange and we dedicate more time, frankly, to exchange in plain language with other Team Europe partners, and we dedicate more time to that, and we could cater to that, obviously. I agree, and I have DFI colleagues that can agree with that as well. If we jointly originate projects and dedicate blending finance or not only guarantees, EFSD Plus has been an incredible program. It's been innovative. It's been something that the DFIs are really craving, using, and are eager to pull off, but also together with the blending that is needed for all the Team Europe players to originate projects and focus on market creation, because we do need those investable ready projects. That's what the DFIs
your question, or is that simply you wanted to?
I would like to trigger that as part of the conversation, because I'm always kind of like the person that hears everything, and in the end, like that's something that I haven't heard. I truly wanted to just drop that into the discussion. I think we're missing out on that.
No, sure. And I think DFIs are an important element, but they need to, I suppose, again, it's the mindset issue that Jean speaks about. There is plenty of cash and plenty of players. It's about how do you mobilize them and create greater coherence within Europe to kind of get it. And I know the Team Europe stuff is, everyone's saying it's a breath of fresh air. But given where we find ourselves politically, we need to move much quicker. I don't have much time because I want to preference women in the audience, if I may, because we haven't had that many. So I want you to, please.
Okay. Thank you so much.
Introduce yourself.
My name is Philomena Pico from the European Centre for Development Policy Management,
yeah.
CDPM. And so thank you to the panel for their very insightful discussion. I think for me, I lead the work on health now, and one of the concerns that I have, I mean, I'm all for private sector money, more quality, but also quantity, but also quality. But what I'm missing is aspects of regulation. So you're getting all this money to go into a new market, but the African countries that are probably receiving these investments are not as advanced in regulating the private sector, especially when it comes to social impact, as you mentioned, issues around health and education. So how do you guarantee that the people you're working with, are not causing more social disparities, increasing inequality in access to health because it's too expensive, or education, or things like this?
How would you like it to see happen?
Oof. Yeah, not
no,
take the role.
Okay.
Not take the role,
okay,
but
I've asked
actual,
you a different question.
Yeah.
My answer would be, I mean, for example, for me, if as a funder before, conditionality matters, right? So how you do the deal with the private sector and how you manage and monitor it makes a difference. But from your experience, what would it be?
It's a good question. Well, for me, I think that in some Well, I'll speak about my own country, Uganda. I've seen examples where the private sector has a good idea, but then they're led to control a whole sector, for example, radiology, and then you make access to diagnostics so difficult, you know, for you to get a CAT scan or MRI, where government is not necessarily involved because it's not their money. So how does government work with the private sector to say, okay, we're allowing you to open this in this district, but please ensure that your prices are also accessible to local market? So this kind of considerations, and maybe just to hear from the panel if they've worked.
Absolutely, I'll give them all. And I'm conscious of the fact that we started 15, 20 minutes late, so I'm carrying on. But I do forgive you for wanting to go if you need to, because you were obviously scheduled to be here for only an hour, which was till 3:30. But I am going to carry on for a little bit longer, if I may, because we did start literally 20 minutes late. I want to take one more contribution, that's it. And I want to bring you in, Christian, I want to bring you in specifically as a kind of end of this open conversation here. Introduce yourself, and I'll bring the panelists in. So obviously you'll introduce yourself, but the reason why I'm bringing him in is because he's worked in the German political system. You've been a foundation leader, and you've done a whole bunch of stuff other than that. And now you lead this thing, which you'll explain, which is called the Global Solutions Initiative. Give us your take on how we try and change a bit of this, because you've been long in the game. I mean that in the nicest way. But you know, you've been in those different sectors also. So over to you.
Yeah, that's a rather tricky, tricky question. Thank you for that. Nevertheless, I think if we to make it work, I think we really have to think also in more global structures. I know that's very high level now, but I think it will never fly. Which was I think this was the topic all the day, Dharmendra. Yeah? So that we really had this inequality issue here. And not inequality issue on say, several terms, but it's an inequality issue as part of the new global governance we urgently need. And therefore, I think the main game changer would really be, for all these issues we discussed earlier the day and also we discussed right now, I think moving an aid to an investment mindset also means we need to change the mindset of the actors, of the institutions which are concerned. So, and it starts, of course, with the renovation of the IMF, the renovation of the World Bank, the renovation of all the other, say, follow-up institutions which are linked to that one, and even within the United Nations. So I have joined the Summit of the Future in New York, and I think it was nice, but nobody is really tackling the fundamental issues. And let me make a case, and this is why I like this today so much, that we really can do a small jump forward. Yeah? So it's just a jump forward to say, hey, let's really think about this new global governance which gives the Global South already the equal say from the beginning, and not just always have to ask to be treated on an equal footing. You are on an equal footing. You have to be on an equal footing. And I think this is the most important point. And I'm very worried in a way, because right now we see a little bit the rise of austerity, of nationalism again.
Sure.
We will see what's the outcome of this morning's election in the US. So I think all these here together, I think we really have to see that we keep it on track. We should not forget about the heritage of the 4 presidencies of the Global South. I think they made a huge progress, also bringing issues to the forefront as the finance issue, sovereign debt restructuring, and the social issues, most of all, which are so important also for the development agenda. And I think this is also an issue, how we come to really true push on investment, and the mindset would also mean that not anybody in the, say, global North and West would see any engagement in the global South with a kind of an issue, maybe it's lost. Yeah, this is simply the wrong mindset. I stop here, and thanks a lot to Africa Europe Foundation, Friends of Europe, and Mo Ibrahim Foundation for having this great day. Thanks a lot, Ramendra.
Thank you. You've branded it so well. Thank you. That's really helpful, Christian. Colleagues, so we've run out of time, right? And we're leaking people all the time here. Papa, I want to start with you. General response, you don't have to if you don't want to, but anything that kind of sparks you to say, I need to say this in my last few words.
A quick reaction to what has been said by EDFI and the gentleman from EU in terms of risk, governance, etc. I'm taking off a little bit my French hat to put it in the African and the Senegalese hat to say a couple of things. The first thing would be we should question ourselves at some point in terms of what we want to do and how we want to do things in terms of investment in the continent of Africa. Because I've been hearing about the risk, Africa, risky, all sort of risk, geopolitical, political, natural, social. It doesn't stop. And yet, Mukhtar is here. I was in the Ministry of Finance of Senegal 2016. JP Morgan, 1.5 billion. Boom. Next year, $2 billion, euros, Eurobonds, etc., etc. And then even today, the countries, like take the case of Guinea, $20 billion in the Simandou project. I can keep on going on, DRC, etc., etc. Why I'm saying this is at some point, if capital markets and big industries and deep pockets want to invest in risky countries, they do it. Why can't we do it? That's a simple question. And we sometimes also overcomplicating the issues. I was at World Bank annual meetings last week, and you look at the map from McNamara till the new president today, they've been complicated. Human rights, democracy, governance, gender, climate, nature, biodiversity. He mentioned it. If you put up all those conditionalities together, how would you deliver? How would you invest? How would you disperse? Just a question out there.
There. And when you say that you were like 2016, you must have been 12, both of you. Goodness me, you're so young. But thank you for that. Thank you for that comment. Reinhold, I want to come to you because I want to go in development agencies. Any comments you have to make before I go? No, I'm going to end with Luc. Don't worry.
I know Luc is engaged elsewhere. Just a very quick reaction to Camilla. Right now, I'm not worried about German European companies benefiting too much. I'm worried about mobilizing more German and European companies to get engaged in our partner countries. It's rather the opposite. When we do technical cooperation projects in the countries, when we advise on whatever it is, transformation roadmaps, NDCs, energy system reform, the next question is, and where do you bring your companies to invest here and help us with it, finance the transition, implement the transition, and bring the technology? So that is my primary concern, and I think this is the thing, speaking of the aid to investment mindset, where we will branch out more, where we have to have a lot more conversations at home, also from the international cooperation landscape, in order to mobilize these new partners for progress in our partner countries.
Great. Luc, you need to go. Is that right?
Yes.
So, okay,
I was sending an email to the other to explain that I will be late, but I would like to react on 2 points. Maybe a lot has been touched upon during the questions and comments session, but I would like to react on the 360 approach and on private sector. So first, on the 360 approach, I do not accept, in fact, the claim that Global Gateway abandons human development. And 2 of the 5 priorities under Global Gateway are education and health. 37 Global Gateway flagships are specifically on human development. And in 2023, INPA, our DG, spent 42% in human development. So the human development is still and will remain at the core of our activities. Global Gateway approach for supporting investment combines investment in hard infrastructure with soft investment for the surrounding ecosystem, as mentioned by Philippe. And this is indeed key to attract the partners and other investors. And coming to the private sector there, I will say that the starting point of Oxfam reasoning is totally false. Yeah. We are not subsidizing the private sector. It's exactly the contrary. We want the private sector to invest in the SDG. We want to, one example. Do you know that the top 10 asset managers have a portfolio of $30 trillion? Okay? So we need to attract a little bit of this money towards a number of countries and sectors that need them. Thank you.
reinforces the point there's definitely money in the system. It's about how you work with it. Mokhtar?
Actually, it's quite interesting what you said here, the asset management industry and how large it is and how hungry they are toward a good project. But anyway, so those conditionalities, to come back on Papsar said, because I was personally involved in raising that 1.1 billion US dollar back then in 2016, which was one of the most successful ones. But again, to come back on a Marshall Plan, the Marshall Plan that I mentioned earlier here, I don't know how many of you know the OECD. The OECD is an offshoot of the Marshall Plan. And if you want to access capital market at a very, very cheap price, make sure you are a member of that club. Which Senegal was a member of that club, so they ended up kind of being very close to double digit and paying. So the whole that conditionality, so the Marshall Plan became a process, it became successful, and that it ended up creating institutions. So allow the same process also to take place on the African continent.
Excellent, point well made, thank you. Jean.
Thank you. Two comments on the conditionality. I fully agree with what has been said. I think we are shooting in our own feet. If you put too many criteria, you will always have the same usual suspect. And I have an example. In Congo, I met an entrepreneur, and he was successful. And because he met a lot of the conditionality element, he was attracting most of the European DFI funding. And he said, actually, you know, Jean, I take those DFI because it's kind of sexy. They invite me to London and Brussels and Paris for meetings, but I could get a cheaper loan with EcoBank. I don't do it because I need it, but because it's sexy. And there, it's wrong. Then we are not doing the right thing, and we are not investing in the company that really needs those kind of funds. So I think the debate is somewhere wrong. And I agree with you, Papa. I was also at the World Bank 2 weeks ago. It's all about the better bank and a lot of sometimes blah blah, but sometimes, so you say, out of touch, out of the reality of the grant. So again, getting out of our bubble. And Camilla, on the question on the European companies, look at China. How China developed over the last 60 years. By attracting foreign direct investment, you need expertise, you need skills, and you need investments. So again, we shoot in our own feet by saying, we cannot have European companies investing in Africa. We need them, and we don't fund them. It's not, I think the report is because I'm sometimes accused as well as a neighbor, you are funding companies. We don't actually. It's parallel funding, and yeah, but sometimes the debate is perceived in the general public wrongly. We need these private investments, and the more European companies are investing in Africa, the more the European politicians will be interested in development aid. Sure. So in a way, it's a vicious circle. The less European companies, the less development aid. The more. And that's why we need, again, change the narrative.
Thank you. Last but not least, Anya. You're the independent fund around here.
Yeah, thanks very much. Not much to add. I mean, I think a lot, as I said at the beginning, is a little bit about who does what. Because I think there's a role for all of those institutions. There's a role for the World Bank, huge need for IDA. There's a role for small financing, because those huge institutions, they have huge transaction costs, so their deals need to be much bigger. But I think what we need to be clearer about, that there's a role for all of those institutions. They need to be much less bureaucratic, that's for sure, and much better than in actually measuring. And at the end of the day, there is no magic in finding crowding in private finance. There's risk profile, and everything has a price. And I think information will help us, hopefully, with developing markets in Africa, also get better at pricing that. But yeah. There's a lot to do.
No, indeed, but I think let's leave the audience with not a hopeless point of view, but a hopeful point of view, in the sense that digitalization has a great capacity to create proxies for managing risk. And with satellite development, we know that in Africa you could do massive things, and the investment opportunity is great. But what I say to all of you, and I'm sure some of you are also in this, that you're in concentric circles of meetings. What needs to happen is to be intersectional, if you can, between the government, the development agencies, you, and the bank. There has to be an opportunity for all of you to come together, and that can't be rocket science, really, can it? It's just perceived bureaucracy and mandate. But, we can say that as an independent think tank. Sorry to have taken your time. I hope you found this effective, useful, instructive, but not boring. And you've taken something away from this. What we do know is our world has changed, and we know our world has changed, and it will change even more dramatically in the months to come. And as I began in this, introducing this in this discussion, one of the things Europe's going to have to be, and as are other regions, is to be more self-deterministic, confident of itself, and not be reactive to what's happening across the pond, and actually being able to think about itself as an opportunity with self-confidence, and work with Africa and Asia and others. Look east and south in different ways, and don't always look to the west, to be able to be much more composed, confident, and I suppose master and mistress of its own destiny. On that point, thank you all very much. I hope you've enjoyed it. Thanks our speakers. Thank you.